So it requires recognition in the UNFCCC financial mechanisms and in their boards that with the current setup, many people are being left behind.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Today's episode was recorded as a live taping of the podcast, produced in partnership with CGIAR, a global research partnership for a food-secure future dedicated to transforming food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. It is part of a series of episodes about the nexus between climate and security, and in our conversation today, expert panelists discuss the multiple benefits of climate adaptation for peace building and human security. The episode kicks off with some opening remarks from Cesare Scartozzi, climate finance and peace specialist and senior research fellow with CGIAR Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. I then moderate a panel discussion featuring Grazia Pacillo, senior scientist and co-lead CGIAR Focus Climate Security, Catherine Wong, team leader for climate and security risk at the United Nations Development Program, and Helena de Jong, senior specialist for fragility with the COP28 UAE presidency. Please visit globaldispatches.org to view all our episodes as part of this climate security series produced in partnership with CGIAR. And now here is Cesare Scartozzi.
Hello and welcome everyone to the second installment of the CGIAR Part 3 webinar series on the multiple benefits of climate adaptation. Today's episode is on the multiple benefits of climate adaptation for peace building and human security, with a focus on the role of climate finance. I'm Cesare Scartozzi, postdoctoral fellow at the CGIAR Focus Climate Security and Alliance of Bioversity International CIAT, and I'm pleased to be hosting this episode on behalf of Climber Initiative, which aims at building systemic resilience against climate variability and extremes. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're seeing compounded crises across the globe, exacerbated by multiple risk drivers coming together, including climate change, underdevelopment, food insecurity, conflict and fragility, and displacement. Meanwhile, financing to address this crisis is limited and dwindling fast. Against this backdrop, existing financial mechanisms, particularly multilateral climate funds, must be evaluated for their potential to create synergies across climate action, development goals, peace building, and displacement prevention. And this is the overarching theme of this three-part webinar series. How can we invest in climate adaptation in a way that achieves multiple benefits across these objectives? In today's second episode, we focus on the synergies of climate adaptation with environmental peace building and human security. We know that investments in climate change adaptation have a significant potential to contribute to peace and security. When strategically designed and implemented, climate adaptation can empower communities to promote socioeconomic development, shaping environments that are both climate resilience and conducive to peace and stability. Promising examples of conflict-sensitive programming include community-driven reforestation in post-conflict zones, livestock corridors to mitigate land use conflicts, community-led resource management systems that prioritize equitable distribution and sustainability, and peace parks, which aim to simultaneously conserve biodiversity and promote cross-border cooperation. Additionally, recent research by CGIAR and UNDP shows that those most at risk from climate change are often situated in fragile and conflict-affected settings. Unfortunately, mobilizing funds for climate adaptation to these areas is proving more challenging than expected. Key issues include a lack of conflict sensitivity among financial institutions, risk adverseness among donors, and a lack of absorptive capacity among receiving countries. Yet there is also a positive shift underway. The international community, as we will hear from our distinguished speakers, is increasingly focused on developing a financial ecosystem that is better equipped to handle such complexities. This shift toward creating a more conflict-sensitive financing environment is a critical step in ensuring that funds not only reach the most vulnerable, but also are used effectively to create sustainable and peaceful change. I turn it over now to our moderator for this webinar, Mark-Leon Goldberg. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark-Leon Goldberg. I'm the editor of UN Dispatch and host the Global Dispatches podcast. Our conversation today is being recorded as a live taping of the podcast. Please visit globaldispatches.org to find all our climate security episodes produced in partnership with CGIAR. Today's conversation is going to focus on how climate adaptation can support peace building and human security. I'll have some questions for our distinguished panelists, and then we will open it up to the audience for questions from you. To pose a question, simply leave it as a comment wherever you are watching this live stream. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our panel. Grazia Pacillo is senior scientist and co-lead CGIAR Focus Climate Security. Welcome. Catherine Wong is team leader for climate and security risk at the United Nations Development Program. Welcome. Helena de Jong is senior specialist for fragility with the COP28 UAE presidency. Welcome to everyone. Let's jump right in with my questions. And Helena, I will start with you. This year, COP28 will notably feature the Relief, Recovery, and Peace Day on December 3rd. Could you share with us how this significant focus on peace and recovery in the context of climate action just came to be part of the COP28 agenda, and what can we expect from that day?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. So relief, recovery, and peace are indeed a very critical part of the COP28 action agenda. We know that humanitarian needs have been escalating over the past years. Climate impacts have either caused or contributed to the suffering. Increasingly, also droughts, floods, extreme weather events are impacting people's lives, impacting people's livelihoods, and interacting with socioeconomic or political stressors, leading to the acceleration of tensions and undermining stability and complicating peace-building efforts. There has been quite some attention to the intersections between climate change, peace, and security in recent years. And it is really an issue that is increasingly addressed in regional and international bodies as well. Egypt, the COP27 presidency, really spotlighted this topic during the COP. The United Arab Emirates made climate, peace, and security a priority during its tenure in the Security Council. And with all of this in mind, it was really only a logical decision to make this topic an integral part of the COP28 agenda, and also to introduce a thematic day to relief, recovery, and peace on the 3rd of December. So what you can expect from this day is, first of all, our priority event of the day will be the launch of the COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery, and Peace, which really reflects the concerns and the common positions of countries and organizations on the need to really urgently accelerate climate action and finance, specifically to countries and communities that are affected by fragility or conflict. In addition, the day will also feature a wide variety of thematic and geographically focused events, including, for example, on early warning systems, on early action, supporting renewable energy in fragile settings, cooperation on transboundary climate adaptation in the MENA region specifically, human mobility, to name just a few. I've been in this position for a year now, and it's really very exciting and encouraging to see how far we've come, I think. We have held many consultations and workshops this past year to build the momentum for these issues at the COP and to ensure that there's a very clear space and a very clear role for the humanitarian and peace-building community to engage in this in COP particularly. And of course, also a very clear space for frontline communities to participate and to have their voices and priorities heard in the discussion as well.
Thank you. Catherine, I'm going to turn to you now. In your capacity at UNDP, what specific projects or policies are currently underway to align climate adaptation with peace-building strategies? Also, how is UNDP influencing the global dialogue on these issues in preparation for COP28?
Thank you so much, Mark, for the question, and thank you to CGIAR and the organisers. I think it's very timely, obviously, to discuss these issues and take stock ahead of COP28 and Dubai. And so, I would say, first of all, in terms of UNDP's work on climate action and sustaining peace, it's worth noting we are the largest implementer of climate action, so mitigation and adaptation within the UN system, and also the largest implementer of NDC support, which is naturally determined contributions, and the Paris Agreement, as well as peace building. So there are critical opportunities that we are engaged in, where we can access and trying to find opportunities for win-win approaches to adaptation and peace. And I think in terms of what the gaps are and what needs to be done, first of all, it's on the operational front. And in terms of our adaptation portfolio, we are implementing something like $425 million adaptation in conflict-affected and fragile contexts, and we have a pipeline of another $550 million as well. So providing this direct support to conflict-affected and fragile contexts to make sure that they have access to climate finance, I think is critical. The strategic part is also really important at the same time, and this is key to ensure the institutionalization of climate-related security risks and an understanding of climate peace and security within climate policies, within global climate governance, and also climate financing mechanisms, right? Understanding, that what we do at project level now and what that means in 5 or 10 years time, how to sustain those results really does depend on this institutional aspect and policies climate policies which do affect conflict prevention and peace building. And in addition to our climate change and peace building portfolios, we also have a dedicated climate security portfolio, and you could consider this to be a testing ground, if you like, for more innovative, perhaps less risk-averse approaches to climate and peace building finance in more complex contexts. So we have an opportunity here really to try to pilot some of these approaches and then to be able to scale at the same time. I think one of the other challenges is that, as mentioned just now, there's very little understanding amongst the climate change community of conflict and fragility and peace and security and how they relate to adaptation and peace. And so this is why we are doing additional advocacy around NDCs and peace, around adaptation and peace, and then also working together with the COP27 Presidency Initiative on Climate Responses for Sustaining Peace, and again with Helena and team at COP28 Presidency as well. I think what will be key to our success here is networks and partnerships.
Thank you. Grazia, could you elaborate on how CGIAR, particularly under your co-leadership, is addressing the intersection of climate security and peace? And what roles or actions are you anticipating at the upcoming COP28 to highlight this work?
Thanks, Mark, and hi, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar. So when we started our research on climate peace and security, it was clear that all the work that CGIAR, the Alliance for Resiliency, and other centers were doing on addressing the impact of climate on land, water, and food systems. In all of this research, we were missing a major contribution, the contribution to peace and security. We soon realized that we were really ignoring somehow the cascading impact that climate has on root causes of fragility and conflict. So since then, we built a robust research area, the one that falls under the CGIAR focused climate security team, that really looks at providing state-of-the-art, policy-relevant, timely evidence on how, where, and for whom climate is exacerbating root causes of fragility and conflict, and more importantly, it identifies specific solutions that can be used to mitigate these nexus. A nexus which is highly complex because there exist multiple mechanisms whereby climate can actually have an impact on fragility and conflict, and vice versa. There are multiple geographical scales, timelines, non-linear dynamics whereby a small change in climate variability or in climate extremes, etc., can actually lead to a disproportionately bigger effect on multiple dimensions, including human security and conflict. But also a nexus, a complex nexus that requires highly localized and contextualized solutions that they have to come directly from those communities that are affected by these nexus. And within the one CGIAR research initiatives, the climate resilience initiatives, which we are talking about today, has been very supportive of the transformative power of climate adaptation to produce multiple co-benefits for human security, for conflict, for fragility, for peace and security. And within these initiatives, since 2022, we have produced a series of innovations, including the Climate Security Observatory, where all of our evidence and science is collated. It is our flagship innovation. But we've also produced tools and guidelines to assess the peace potential of climate adaptation, and also help big climate funds such as the GCF in increasing the conflict sensitivity, climate security sensitivity of their programming. Now, in relation to COP, I think it's evident that international policymakers are becoming more and more sensitive to the agenda. See, for instance, the COP27, the launch of the CRISP initiative, but also, as Elena mentioned, with this year, for the very first year, we will have an entire day dedicated on peace. And it's not only that. I mean, there's the declaration that Elena has mentioned. So the very first time that we have an event such as that. So I don't know that we have to be cautious. We need to sort of keep our hopes down. But I think it's an extraordinary step forward for these communities to embrace the climate peace and security nexus. And we will be a COP. We will make sure that the climate peace and security agenda is well represented, and we have many events that we are co-hosting with our partners. So stay tuned for more details and information on this. And so here, over to you, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you. And Helena, we're going to go back to you. So current institutional frameworks and the UNFCCC financial mechanisms are arguably not adequately reaching populations in fragile and conflict-affected settings. From your perspective, how can this be improved in order to better reach these populations?
Thank you. Yes, they certainly do not adequately reach populations in such settings. This has been very clearly demonstrated by several recent studies, who basically all pointed to the fact that the more fragile a country is, the less climate finance it receives, despite the climate vulnerability of these countries. And it has also become very clear from some of the evaluations of the UNFCCC financial mechanisms. Start with the recognition that current efforts to build climate resilience are insufficiently tailored or insufficiently targeted to the needs of countries and communities in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So it requires recognition in the UNFCCC financial mechanisms and in their boards that with the current setup, many people are being left behind. And having the numbers is very important here to clearly show that there is a gap. And both UNDP and CGIAR actually have been instrumental in bringing out this element, and a couple of other organizations as well have really played an important role in putting the exact numbers on paper and making that very clear. So second of all, I think it really requires a granular understanding of the issue at stake. It's really not just the amount of finance that is available. Developing countries more broadly and fragile and conflict-affected countries specifically really face a lot of barriers and challenges in terms of accreditation, in terms of application. procedures. These procedures really take years, are very bureaucratic, and they also cost a lot of money and a lot of capacity. Then there's also the risk, both real and perceived, with operating in such settings. And this is something we very frequently hear from finance providers, that the mechanisms are simply not set up to work in fragile or unstable environments. Situations can really quickly change, which means that investments and gains from projects will be lost. But there are several opportunities to improve. And in my view, a lot really comes down to greater flexibility from these financial mechanisms, as well as capacity strengthening of governments and local actors.
Thank you. Catherine, we're going to turn back to you. Given your expertise in recent work, how can we tackle the problem of climate finance and peace building, typically working in silos and on different timescales? What are some effective strategies for integrating these program areas, particularly when developing and implementing policies in regions requires humanitarian relief and interventions as well?
Thanks so much, Mark. I think this is an important question. And in the emergency context, humanitarian support is critical and life-saving. We could also make the same argument for adaptation investments in exactly the same way. And so we need to think about short-term and long-term needs at the same time and make sure that affected populations, vulnerable populations, they have that access they urgently need to humanitarian finance, but that humanitarian response isn't crowding out the much needed investments in adaptation at the same time. We do need to bolster capacities in the short term, but make sure that, again, that these short-term investments will not amount to maladaptation or false economy in the long run. Secondly, I think it's important to understand climate finance. It's not being in a vacuum, so to speak. And Helena kind of alluded to this point just now. If we want to change climate finance, climate finance is the instrument of climate policy, right? Climate policy, the objective of it is to direct climate finance to the climate priorities that we decide upon. And so there's a challenge here. If we had an additional $1 million for conflict-affected and fragile context adaptation finance, or 10 million or 100 million or $1 billion, what would we do with that finance? And these kind of questions, they need to be asked both at national and a local level. So, changes, the much needed changes that we need in climate finance need to be accompanied by technical support, by capacity building investments at the same time to be effective and to ensure absorption. So we really cannot consider the question of climate finance and peace separately from broader questions of adaptation, mitigation, and technical support in the climate field without due consideration of prevention and peace building at the same time. There are many countries that struggle to access climate finance. Many of them, as Helena said, are conflict affected or fragility affected as well. And there's a lot of different networks where such countries can exchange from many different areas of sustainable development, support, and peace building in other areas as well, but none that specifically target climate policy and finance. So we are working together with the COP27 presidency and the current International Centre for Prevention and Peace Building to deliver a network and training support through the Climate Peace and Security Experts Academy, so that conflict-affected and fragile contexts are able to connect and exchange experience on climate policies and finance that also deliver on sustained peace.
Thank you. Grazia, in many conflict-prone regions, agriculture and food security are deeply entwined with issues of stability and peace. From your perspective, how can climate finance be applied not just to enhance agricultural resilience, but also to contribute to peace building as well in these areas?
Thanks, Mark. So I have 2 points here. The first one is the need to transform climate action, climate finance as a consequence to become effectively an instrument for peace. We need to transform that. The second is that we need to de-risk climate finance in these areas. So regarding my first point, As we moved ahead with our research on climate peace and security, we realized that effectively traditional climate adaptation and climate action, climate finance approaches, they're not enough anymore. They're not enough because we've seen many times, and we've seen in many occasions and contexts, episodes of maladaptation where people have adopted climate adaptation practices, and then they ended up being worse off simply because the compound effect of climate on other dimensions for human security, for conflict that were not accounted for. The solution for this, and I will borrow some of the concepts from Macroeconomics 101, is that we really need to use sort of a general equilibrium approach as more systemic lens, a bigger lens whereby we look at the climate crisis. So one approach that really acknowledges the cascading effects that can be generated by the accelerated climate crisis, one that aligns resilience objectives with other objectives, core benefits can be generated by climate adaptation, including peace building, one that really transforms climate adaptation, climate action, climate finance, and makes them instruments for peace, as the new Secretary General sort of is indicated in the new agenda for peace. But the other major issue is, of course, that even climate finance has not been designed to be invested in risky area. Investing in risky area is risky. So, but the tricky issue is that most of the fragile conflict-affected countries are those that are also in need of the climate adaptation funds and in action. And our recent research shows that the 142 million households, which is 527 people, are located in fragile conflict-affected countries that are also most in need of climate adaptation. But of course, the solution, the question is, how do we de-risk these countries? And I think that knowledge is key. Knowledge on the type, intensity, and frequency of the risks that can help implementers to understand how to mitigate these risks is important. And one of the things that we're doing, and sorry, I'm going a bit over time here, one of the things that we are doing together with the Green Climate Fund is to the development of the climate security programming dashboard. This dashboard essentially aims to de-risk investments to increase conflict sensitivity of the Green Climate Fund's interventions by providing knowledge and data and the self-assessment tool, to help accredited agency to design their projects. And we will be launching that at COP, and it will hopefully become the go-to place for accredited agencies for the projects and proposals. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you. And just a reminder, we'll be getting to audience questions soon. If you'd like to leave a question, simply type it in the comment field wherever you are watching this live stream. Helena, in your view, what are the critical gaps or overlooked areas in current approaches to integrating climate adaptation and peace-building efforts, particularly in the context of international negotiations and frameworks like COP28? And how can we make sure that COP pledges on these topics translate into actual increased financing and support to populations affected by compounded climate security threats?
Well, so in the context of the COP, I think it's fair to say that there hasn't been much attention to the nexus between climate adaptation and peace building, if any at all. And this is not just the case for peace building, actually. It has the same for some other issues like health, for example. I think food and water are a bit more prominent, but it's often about systems, not about people. So what is really most important in my view is that we adopt a much more people-centered approach. The effects of people are really not always clear from the very technical discussions and negotiations that they place in processes like this. Even though, of course, the loss and damage discussion is bringing this out a little bit more, but I think it can definitely be strengthened. So one critical element that I think could and should be much more clearly reflected in climate adaptation efforts is conflict sensitivity and peace responsiveness. And Grazia and Catherine mentioned this both. There are several good examples out there already that demonstrate that integrated climate adaptation and peace building programming can really lead to strong results in terms of social cohesion, in terms of improving relations between host communities and displaced populations, and also in terms of inclusion and participation of women and other groups. And as for COP pledges, we really see this as a systemic effort. It will take time to change the existing procedures, but from the discussions that we are having, and many of these discussions are with the Climate Finance Fund and also with other climate finance providers, there definitely seems to be an openness and willingness from them to engage on this topic. What we do really see, I think, is a mismatch between the immediate needs of countries and communities, particularly those affected by conflict and fragility, and the time that it will take for climate finance flows to properly reach fragile and conflict-affected settings. So in addition to immediate allocations of finance, which I think are really, really critical to support climate adaptation in such areas, we will really need to see more procedural changes to increase finance and support. So this, I think, will hopefully be reflected at the COP and will be a stepping stone towards like longer term systemic change on this matter.
Thank you. Catherine, your recent publication, Climate Finance, Conflict and Gender, Benchmarking Women's Empowerment and Sustaining Peace in the Journal of Environment and Security, has added crucial insights to this conversation. Where do you see significant gaps and unexplored avenues in policy or practice when it comes to using climate finance as a tool for both environmental and peace-building outcomes?
Thanks so much, Ted. I think, from this article, the first thing that I really wanted to do is try to capture some of the work that we are doing as UNDP in this particular space, not only looking at climate action and conflict fragility, but also gender and women's empowerment, knowing that women suffer the most from the dual burden of climate extremes, impacts, and conflict. And I think what's interesting is that we found that the lack of awareness was really one of the biggest gaps, and that's lack of awareness of the importance of conflict and fragility to climate action and climate finance. Even though a study by the GEF Independent Evaluation Office shows that conflict is the number one obstacle and the number one factor in terms of delays or postponement or cancellation of projects, there's still a lack of understanding at a kind of global and also national level. I mean, if you're looking at the Paris Agreement, if you're looking at UNFCCC, if you're looking at the Kyoto Protocol, which came before it as well, there's not a single mention of conflict, fragility, or peace and security. So there's just this lack of awareness of conflict as it relates to climate action in the climate change community, and then also the solutions as well, what we can do here to address conflict in our climate change projects. And I think this article, this study shows that we can take our approach to gender mainstreaming in the field of climate policy and finance, and apply that approach to conflict and peace building. And if you look at the GEF's portfolio in 2012, they found that 60% of their projects were gender blind. And then after they instituted the gender policy 8 years later, it's less than 1.3% of their projects are gender blind. So this is from having a gender policy and being able to implement it. And so if we could do the same for conflict and peace building, one could argue we could have a kind of considerable, wide-reaching approach in terms of making sure that climate policy and finance meet the needs of conflict affecting contexts.
Thank you. Grazia, the CSPD dashboard that you are going to launch at COP introduces new concepts of conflict sensitivity and peace potential into mechanisms that are very unusual for big climate funds. It's not going to be easy to integrate these into the modus operandi of international financial institutions. Looking at the near future, what is your call for action to transform climate adaptation and finance?
Thanks, Mark. So I think we all agree that a lot more needs to be done, and we're only at the beginning of this process. Ideally, we all would like to, as Elena said and Catherine said,
We also like IFIs to really embrace, they could include and integrate the conflict sensitivity analysis and assessment across the entire project cycles. But the reality is that most of the IFIs will not do it in the short term. It's not in their political mandate. Some of the states that we all know about, they are even opposed to the idea that climate can exacerbate root causes of conflict. So the old securitization issue here. So we need to accept incremental steps. So we need to take this step by step, small changes that can yield significant benefits. So, for instance, we could expect IFIs. We sort of urge IFIs actually to do so as soon as possible to for instance create some training on conflict sensitivity for the staff, to embed climate conflict sensitivity analysis into their evaluation processes, monitoring system, etc., or even to assure mechanisms that whereby the conflict and fragility risks are embedded into their existing safeguard and risks approaches. This will not require any major change. They will go to the board and ask for policy changes, mandate changes, etc. These are very simple steps that they fall under their mandate and can really be done in an easy way. Another thing that we urge IFIs to do is to collaborate but more effectively, and I don't even know if they do it now, to be honest. So to start collaborating with peace building funds. Oftentimes they work with the same actors, they work in the same countries, they just don't talk to each other. So there's climate resilience, climate adaptation, climate mitigation that has been implemented by IFIs, and then there is peace building fund doing something else with the same people. So of course, I mean, this is not good. I think as we move ahead in this compound risk area, in the poly-crisis area, we need to make sure that we create a platform, we create a community of practice, a coordination group whereby IFIs, peace building funds, and other research organizations working on the nexus, they really talk to each other, they share knowledge, they share data, they share lessons learned. Because ultimately what we want and what we really need to do, even in light of the COP that is coming, we need to discuss how a fine measure to mitigate the impact that climate is having on multiple dimensions, not only the agriculture, the land, water, food systems, but the human security overall. And we can only do that if we learn from each other and we build on each other's strengths. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. And again, a reminder to get your questions in. I have one last round of questions for our panelists, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer the same question. And that's this. Given the growing number of organizations now operating in the intersection of climate adaptation and peace building, there seems to be a lack of coherent and integrated understandings of the challenges and solutions in this space. From each of your perspectives, how can we create an ecosystem where different entities, from international organizations to local communities, work together more effectively, ensuring a unified approach towards climate resilience, peacekeeping, and human security? And Helena, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mark. I think it's a very broad question, but but a very important one. Something quite concrete that I have noticed working on this topic is that in the last year or so, or maybe 24 months, there have been an increasing number of working groups that are being established that include experts from NGOs, peacebuilding actors, the multilateral development banks, the climate finance funds, humanitarian development actors, like all the actors working in this space. So really cross-cutting. So I think that's very, very important to have these types of places where you can discuss and exchange lessons learned with each other, and also to some extent hold each other to account. And what is really important here, I think, is that we don't just bring in the fertility experts from all these organizations, but that it is really like a cross-cutting conversation between both climate, fertility experts, and other actors in this space. So really having this platform for conversations is critical, I think. Then, of course, training, guidance documents, the dashboard that CGIAR has been working on, that's also super, super important. And what we are trying to achieve, particularly with Relief, Recovery, and Peace Day, is also really to provide this space for all of these different actors to come together and to see what the next steps are. First of all, what are the challenges? What do we need to address? But also really outlining the way forward.
Thank you. And Catherine, to you.
Thanks so much. I think I definitely agree with both Grazia and Helena on the importance of communities of practice, and within the UN system, under the climate security mechanisms, that's interagency initiative between DPPA, that's Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, DPO, Department of Peacekeeping Operations, and UNEP, UN Environmental Programme, UNDP. We have a community of practice of some 500 members, staff members working for the UN, and 35 different UN agencies at headquarters in the field. So, we have a safe space, so to speak, to be able to exchange on good practices, on lessons learned, on climate and peace building approaches and financing in these particular crisis and conflict affected contexts, to be able to make those connections organically, to share the work that we're doing, crowdsource good thinking, and promote knowledge management and co-generation. And another similar space, again, that we've cultivated, as I mentioned just now, is this kind of Peace and Security Experts Academy. Really, there's a need to think about and to encourage this kind of peer-to-peer exchange between conflict-affected and fragile contexts. There's policymakers that are working on climate finance and peace building finance, allowing them to connect and to share what works in these particular regions and affected areas, knowing that other good cases, good practices could not be applied in the same way. And I think a unified approach is challenging as well. Climate manifestations, conflicts, drivers, not only violent conflict but insecurity and fragility as well. They play out in different ways, and so context specificity, I think, is critically important here as well. And being able to do this at a global level, interregional exchange is key, but also at a national and local level. So we are working on approaches to strengthen regionalisation, if I can call it that, working with regional entities in the global south and bolstering their capacities to address climate-related security risks. And then at the same time, the localisation agenda, so working with local peace building networks, working with partners who are there to make sure that they are in the driving seat, so to speak, and defining what approaches work for them.
Thank you. And Grazia, to you, what can we do to harness this unified approach?
Thanks, Mark. So I think we all agree that in the past decades, well, 5 to 10 years, the evidence on the fact that climate can impact conflict and security is increased enormously. But when we talk with the policymakers and decision makers overall, even those that are deciding about the allocation of climate funds, they all ask, okay, where is the actual evidence that I can use here at national, regional, international level? And so there exists a fundamental disconnect between science and policy. So when we then say, okay, what is the most authoritative piece of research that you will like to have on this? And everybody turns up and say, okay, what is the IPCC report saying? And I think that's where we have to reflect, where we have to change things. When we look at the IPCC, in 2022, I remember that the work paper number 2, I think it was the first time where climate security was actually mentioned. The impact of climate recovery was actually mentioned, that there was some evidence on that. In the new Agenda for Peace that UN Secretary General published this year, there is a clear demand for a technical working group, an expert group, to be created, or a special report even to be written within the IPCC. And I think that is something that could be done. But of course, we will need to have support. And now I'm looking at Elena, we're not looking, but thinking about Elena, UAE, the commitment to climate security. How can we leverage this commitment of UAE and other countries that we know are supportive of this agenda to actually push for such a technical working group to be created in IPCC to support the new Agenda for Peace? And still in line with this idea of bridging the science policy gap,
I think it's important, as Catherine mentioned, that we don't forget that oftentimes this type of research is driven, these type of decisions are driven by northern institutions, by northern countries. It's about time that we decolonize this agenda, we localize the information and the knowledge, we empower local, global South researcher, and for that, as a team at CGIAR, Focus Climate Security, we are really supportive of these ideas. We would like to really push for the creation of partnerships that really enable the global South to go to these places of power, including the IPCC. So thanks a lot, Mark.
Well, thank you all. I am now going to pass the microphone to Peter Laderock of CGIAR, who has been monitoring the comments in the live stream and is going to pose some of your questions to our panelists. Peter, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark, for your great moderation. Yeah, indeed, the chat is going very lively here. We have many good questions. So let me get started. So the first one for Helena from Andrew Harper. So CGIAR has been providing excellent analysis data on the likely impacts of the climate emergency in fragile and conflict-affected states. But what can we expect from COP28 to get adaptation funding to impacted communities?
Very good question. So as I said in my previous response, what we're hoping to do with the Relief, Recovery and Peace Day and putting this topic very firmly on the agenda for COP28 is really to urge countries specifically and finance providers specifically, climate finance funds, the Multilateral Development Bank, others, to really recognize that there is a lack of finance going to fragile and conflict-affected communities, but to also put forward solutions as how we can change this. So this is really, to some extent, a matter of like their internal discussions, and we've asked each and every single one of them, everyone we spoke with over the past year, to really think about what their individual role is and what they can put forward to change this issue. And this is something that we're looking to announce in the form of a package of solutions that will accompany the declaration, which is more of a political recognition that this is an issue in the first place.
Excellent. So we hope to get many important pledges, and we're looking forward to seeing those. Another question from Christophe Belperon. Peace building and climate experts need to sit together to design jointly such climate action sensitivity to fragile and conflict. Do you have examples of platforms, networks where this happens? I'm a climate resilience expert, but I have very little understanding of peace building work. So any platforms and networks for colleagues who are following here where they could join and learn when they're either from the climate side or from the peace building side? So any recommendations?
Maybe you can start, and
yes,
Catherine can jump in. So at the moment, there are a few groups of technical working group on climate security experts that are related to several conferences. For instance, the Berlin Climate Security Conference, but there is the Munich Security Conference, but also within the UN Security Council, there's sort of informal groups of experts and country member states that discuss this issue. But they're fundamentally, Christophe, I think you really you're really right in saying that we don't have a space where there is an effective cooperation and a cooperation mechanism that puts together not only the researchers from the global north, global south, and across different organizations to really discuss and share knowledge and practices on this, but then we don't have the space for affected communities to bring their voice and their participation. This is something that we're trying to do with our work, with our research, to really bring the voice of affected communities, but we need to do more. And for instance, now we are starting a project in Somalia, which we know, highly vulnerable to climate impacts, but also conflict in the fragile affected countries. So, but where is the coordination mechanism? Where is the framework that will allow us to understand who's working on what and what can we do together to really sort of escalate, create spillovers across the work that we are all doing together? So I think the way forward is to create and to foster this coordination mechanism even more than we've done so far. Under the acknowledgement that, as I said, we live in a poly-crisis area. So we cannot really only tackle climate resilience on one side because we will have spillovers on other levels. We will have a food security crisis. We will have a conflict crisis. So I think we need to change our operation, the way that we do things, sort of in isolation somehow. And I know that some coordination exists at country level, regional level, etc. But we need to use the climate security lenses now to change the way that we're doing things. And there's still a lot more that needs to be done there. Thanks.
Thanks. Katrin, any networks, platforms that you're aware of, or anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Grazia got there first as I was trying to work out how to put my hand up. I just wanted to kind of agree with our observations as well in terms of the Berlin Climate Security Conference, Stockholm Forum. We see many experts and practitioners on climate peace and security engaged in these forums. These are great places to network and to make contacts as well. But as Grazia also alluded to, a lot of this work in terms of programmatic design, like conceptualization of these initiatives, takes place at kind of country office level or local level as well. So I'm not sure where Christoph is based, but it would be great to keep in touch. We are also trying to develop a roster of experts on climate peace and security. This expertise is so hard to come by. Those who have a good grasp of climate environment on one hand and peace and security on the other. So there are various different calls for proposals, calls for experts. I see a lot of activity on LinkedIn and other social media outlets as well. And we do try to circulate this. We also have a mailing list within the UNDP where we try to keep colleagues abreast of the work that they're doing as well. So it'd be great to keep in touch with this as well. Thanks so much, Peter.
Super. Excellent. So we have another question here. From Garrett Adler. I would be curious to hear more about specific climate adaptation interventions that have yielded positive outcomes for peace and security. Also curious about some specific examples of climate adaptation intervention that do a good job of considering conflict sensitivity. So anybody would like to take that one?
I can start if you want. Quick. Sorry, Catherine, if you want to go, go. But I can start. Thanks. So let me say that we're still at the beginning of this journey, and examples on climate security sensitive adaptation projects or peace building projects. They are still coming. There's been a review done by the Peace Building Fund on their projects, on these case studies of these projects that have contributed to both climate resilience and peace building. But as I said, we are still at the beginning. We still need to understand how is it possible? How will it be possible to transform climate adaptation and make it an instrument for conflict prevention, for peace, etc. So one example that I can give you is still from the Peace Building Fund review is of two projects that were implemented in Yemen. Where that aim to mitigate local water blockages and associated conflict in the country, which is one of the most water scarce in the world, and one where conflict dynamics have halted many local peace building and development activity for more than a decade. So these projects have shown that using an innovative approach to include women in local water management dispute resolutions, they've also succeeded not only to overcome gender barrier in this country, but also in creating more stable, less fragile, and less confrontational environment around specific local natural resources access and management. Also contributing to, of course, granting better access to water to different people involved in the project, but also to alleviate local conflict and sources of vulnerability. So I will stop here. Perhaps this is one case, but the review actually identifies 43 projects that have contributed to both climate resilience and peace, but we're still learning as we go. Over.
Super, great examples. Catherine?
Yeah, thanks so much, Peter. I could try to add here as well. I mean, from UNDP side, we're fortunate, in addition to have the broader support that we have from our UN colleagues through the climate security mechanism and the UN community of practice on climate security, with the support C-level, we're able to deploy climate security advisors to all our regional hubs. And they play a critical role in backstopping some of our investments through various different bilateral and multilateral funds and funding sources as well. So from our side, there are, I would say, a good number now of projects that are under implementation or pipeline that are considering conflict sensitivity. But, the challenge for me, I think, is, scale and to be able to do it systematically. And I think that can only start at fund level. I mean, we could do everything that we can, but still project by project, unless we could have some kind of policy guidance or some hard requirement from a particular funding source. And then the other challenge here also relates to conflict sensitivity, conflict prevention. How do we measure something that we avoided or did not happen? So there's this particular challenge. And then the other, probably slightly bigger challenge is, again, in terms of metrics, how we measure the impact of our climate work, right? And climate finance is allocated based on climate rationales and direct climate benefits, being able to show that you are contributing to adaptation and mitigation. And so, the allocation of climate finance isn't decided, if I can describe it as such, then by conflict sensitivity or peace building co-benefits. But we know that conflict, again, is an obstacle to climate action adaptation, and that climate finance and climate action and adaptation, if we get it right, can also have co-benefits for peace as well. So I think somehow by changing our metrics, being able to show that we are measuring and maximizing peace co-benefits, we can actually get to more systematic approaches and being able to demonstrate our impact in terms of prevention and sustaining peace.
Super. So many good examples, but we need to get to scale. Huh? So I have another, just a last question, and so I ask you to just respond in 30 seconds for those who have an answer. What role do private sector investments play in complementing governmental efforts in climate adaptation, and how can these two sectors better collaborate in fragile and conflict-affected settings? So anybody, 30 seconds.
Yeah,
how can we bring the
private sector to jump in and hear Grazia. But very quickly, I think bankable adaptation projects, obviously the Holy Grail, and critically important. There's lots of ways I think we could get to these in terms of working with local farmer groups, local herder groups. So working with these groups as well, and promoting formalization. Maybe they have better access to credit. They have more sustainability in terms of their practices and bringing products to market. And then also maybe it's a way of strengthening social cohesion. And at the same time, we're looking in conflict-affected and fragile contexts. There are lots of small providers that are already there that are working in the energy sector, right? And so it's making sure that our investments don't crowd out these actors, but are actually encouraging and creating enabling environments for them to thrive as well.
Excellent. Any feedback from COP presidency or Grazia? Elena or Grazia? No.
Elena, do you want to go next? No, otherwise I have a comment.
Please.
Okay. Well, as I said before, localizing is everything. The localization agenda needs to be applied to the HDP nexus, the humanitarian development, the peace nexus, and the private sector coming from the countries that are most affected by the compound risk of climate, peace, and security. I mean, they have the solutions. So one example that I can give you is within the Fragility, Conflict, and Migration Initiative, the one CGIAR Fragility, Conflict, and Migration Initiatives, we are implementing Peter is called it. We're implementing an idea of accelerating the accelerator to support
to couple the CGIAR scientists with local private sector, local innovation, local companies and groups that have good ideas on how to create co-benefits for peace along the humanitarian development, the peace nexus, and then support them in implementation of these ideas. So I think that if we are able to include and support and help local private sector to implement those ideas, I think it will be key to addressing specific issues in these countries.
Super. Thanks so much. Thanks to the panelists for a very engaging discussion. I will now hand over to Cesare Scartozzi to wrap us up and summarize the exciting discussion that we had today. Cesare, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. We had a very engaging conversation with many insights that the panelists navigated through the critical aspects of climate adaptation and its integration with peace building, particularly in the lead-up to COP28. So it would be hard to summarize everything, but I will try to focus on some of the key topics that were covered. So Helena highlighted the integration of the Relief, Recovery and Peace Day into COP28, marking a strategic shift in linking climate action with peace and recovery. She created Egypt for initially spotlighting this theme and noted the UAE's role in solidifying it within the COP framework. She also addressed the crucial need for climate finance in fragile states, pointing out the current mismatch between financial provisions and the immediate needs of these regions. She also emphasized that not just the quantity matters, but also the method of fund allocation and also the delivery is vital. So it's really important to streamline how these funds can be accessed. And concluding her talk, also she stressed the importance of bringing together different actors at COP28, which will serve hopefully as a platform for significant change in addressing these challenges. Moving to Catherine, she provided key insights into emerging climate adaptation and peace building. She spoke of UNDP's expansive role across different areas, highlighting their focus on creating win-win solutions in peace building and climate action. Also, she mentioned that UNDP has already a significant adaptation portfolio in conflict-affected contexts. And she underscored the importance of embedding climate sensitivity within climate finance and policies, arguing that it's key to institutionalize conflict sensitivity to create a sustainable ecosystem in the long run. She also emphasizes the importance of making climate finance and policy sensitive to conflict dynamics, potentially using gender mainstreaming as a model for integrating peace building into climate action. And finally, Catherine also pointed out to the need for innovative risk-tolerant projects in fragile settings, advocating for integrated programming that aligns humanitarian aid and adaptation efforts, remarking that the two are not mutually exclusive, but they can be aligned. And finally, also she mentioned about the critical role of knowledge sharing among conflict-affected states and the necessity of awareness within the climate change community about these complex interdependencies. Moving to Grazia, she talked about the intricate connection between agriculture, climate security, and peace. She stressed the necessity for innovative research and policymaking that effectively intertwines these areas, and particularly in the context of conflict-prone regions. Grazia underscored CGIAR's commitment at COP28 to turn research into practical, region-specific toolkits, such as the Climate Security Program and Dashboard that she was mentioning, to support greater entities and direct entities in the GCF pipeline. Finally, Grazia also identified initial steps in incorporating conflict sensitivity into standard practices, pointing out challenges like the absence of mandates in international finance institutions to operate on conflict sensitivity, as well as the reluctance from certain recipient nations to even discuss the topic. And so what she suggested was to use incremental but impactful steps, such as, for example, training of staff in IFIs, as well as enhancing cooperation between financial and peacebuilding entities and organizations. So in conclusion, all the panelists emphasize the need for an ecosystem where various entities, from international organizations to local communities, can collaborate effectively to support conflict-sensitive action. Our panelists also unanimously agreed that investing in conflict-affected areas is not only a moral imperative, but also a strategic necessity, crucial for broader climate action and global security. So we hope that as we look forward to COP28 beyond, the insights shared today will contribute to shaping the debate and on how to build a resilient and peaceful community around the globe. We can also agree that there is a lot of work that has to be done. And to this end, the CGIAR and the Climate Initiative will continue studying and deploying activities that aim to promote conflict-sensitive adaptation and mobilize finance for fragile conflict-affected regions. And as our panelists mentioned earlier, we all need to work together to reach these objectives. And we look forward to collaborating with you going forward. And with this, I want to say thank you to our speakers for their insights, our moderators, Mark Goldberg and Peter Ladrak, our technical support behind the scenes, and all of you connected remotely for your participation and excellent questions. I look forward to continuing this conversation and invite you all to join our third and upcoming webinar on November 15 on the multiple benefits of climate adaptation for disaster-related displacement. Again, thank you all for your participation.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.